expressing at all. We as adults, we have found some ways to cope up, express our grief, but like we have discussed before, it's very difficult to understand how kids are expressing, coping with it.
How do children really grieve differently from others? How do we make the children comfortable with expressing what they are going through? Need and importance to make children be prepared for whatever the worst could be, and how can we do that?
However much we might wish, a virtual space has its very, very real and significant limitations. So in a sense, I feel it's a loss of childhood. You can be vulnerable and strong at the same time. So how do we have those conversations?
Just allow the child to be for some time and don't push. Just leave them alone, the older ones, and they will come back.
Age-appropriate information will never scare a child. What scares a child is actually wondering. Tough conversations are not meant to be ended with a ribbon on top.
Sometimes when I say something needs to be done is just be there.
I feel grief and grieving responses are as unique as fingerprints.
To talk to your kids about something, don't talk. Just ask questions.
If I'm going to talk as a mother in that role, I might end up coming with my concerns, invariably.
Pause and watch the child's reaction and be guided by that reaction.
We need to do a lot of grief and loss myth busting,
Warm welcome to the third episode of Grief to Growth, presented to you by HopeWorks Foundation and Skills Cafe and our partner organizations. So HopeWorks Foundation is a non-profit organization where we, like our name suggests, work towards bringing hope to underprivileged or disadvantaged children with young minds, young hopes. We wish to establish them, educate them, and in that hope and in the same spirit, today's webinar is all the more special because today we wish to speak about the many shades of loss of children. We have with us our panel, Dr. Nandini Murli, and she has mentioned that children are highly disenfranchised when it comes to grieving. Let me share you an example. I was in conversation with Jacinta ma'am a while back, and she shared with me a story. So this child in his online classroom was given this homework to write a list of items that he or she would like to pick for a picnic. Now, if you ask me, I would pick cheese balls and wafers and whatnot for my friends and me. But this child wrote in his picnic list a hand sanitizer and a mask. Now that must appear cute, but it's actually also very sad and a huge, loud realization of these current situations. I also am aware of this term called quarantine baby. Apparently, kids born in the past 2 years are called that. And I saw this viral video of a toddler, and this toddler was going around in the corner, touching every liquid item and dabbing its hands like it's hand sanitizer. So this is like a huge realization of how the pandemic and the hostility around might and will continue to impact the personal development of children. On the same note, HopeWorks Foundation has also enabled 2 children, brothers and sister, and provided them education. In this pandemic, their mother lost her life. They lost her mother, and their father abandoned them. So the children alone are now being taken care at the foundation and we're providing them education. So with this, we want to tackle this very sensitive thing that in this pandemic, the children are highly disenfranchised. Are we seeing them grieving, which on a very normal social norm is considered that children are not supposed to grieve, or they are incapable of the grief. And which is why today's seminar is very special to us. To give you a little perspective, our past 2 episodes have taught us something very important. In the Grief to Growth episodes, we've learned that pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And with this session, we want to learn, are we seeing our children while they are suffering? Are we allowing them to be vocal about how they are feeling? And are we enabling them to grow from it, from the many shades of loss, the loss of a childhood, the loss of playmates, the loss of a community, the loss of people, and for some very unfortunate children, even loss of their parents. So Hope Works, where we wish to bring this hope. We want to enable these children to feel like the world is a playground and they can grow again, rebuild again. And which is why I'm super thrilled to introduce you to our eminent panelists. With them, with their intellectual knowledge, we will learn how to enable our children into growing again, to learning again, and to hoping again. We have with us Ms. Jyoti Sanath, with 21 years of experience as a teacher and instructional leader and the principal at Samhita Academy. Having learning about her, I realized something very important, just how important a teacher is in our well-being. Being a young adult, I've learned so much from my gurus and teachers, and she is rightfully mentioned, and I'll quote, that teacher can override all the other not so great experiences that may be a part of growing up. And a loving and caring relationship with my teachers has helped me a great deal, which is why I'm really looking forward to learning from her today. We also have with us Dr. Nandini Murli. She is a certified life coach in loss and transition and a suicide prevention and mental health activist. Having lived through a suicide loss herself and leading an initiative called Speak, the very essence of her initiative is very important to today's session, where we want to change these conversations around disenfranchised loss and to promote mental health. So welcome so much, ma'am. We're really looking forward to your learning. And Dr. Meghna Singhal, a clinical psychologist and an internationally certified parenting coach. The first time I was introduced to her, I binged watched all of her YouTube channels, and I learned something very important, that as a part of me growing up and maturing, I realized how subconsciously a child absorbs good and bad from our parents, all the values. The first relationship we establish as children is with our parents. So her input as a parenting coach today will be very important to be able to sensitize how our children are feeling these days. So huge welcome to you, ma'am. And to moderate all our conversations today, we have our guest, Neerja Ganesh. She's been a volunteer and a member of the core team at HopeWorks for a long time. Having seen all her work and her workshops, I'm so confident that with her giving her perspective today in conversations is going to be very, very useful. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. This session is going to be special. This session is about children, and I hope that you have a good time learning and enabling the future. Thank you. I'd like to introduce, yes, ma'am, Neerja Ganesh with us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Akanshi. And to start with, let me, say I'm really privileged and honored to have had this opportunity to moderate today's session. And for some of you in the audience, you might be wondering, what is it that I bring to the table in terms of expertise with the topic that we have on hand. All the three panelists are experts, in their own space with this topic. I think the only claim to fame that I have is that I'm a mother of a 19-year-old. And I should say I have 19 years of experience in terms of mothering and parenting a child. And there's a lot that has gone through. I mean, there's no book which tells us, how to be a good parent or did you do things right. And hindsight is a very big teacher. Well, I'm not going to have another child where I can, kind of use those learnings, but definitely be able to kind of use those learnings and the learnings from today to see how we could impact the other children around us. So I really welcome all the participants to today's roundtable discussion. while we have experts who are going to be sharing their experiences, their thoughts, best practices on some of the questions that we're going to handle today. We will also have time for an audience Q&A. So please feel free to put in your questions in the chat. Sorry, there's a Q&A box, I think, where you can put in your questions, and we will definitely take those questions and address as many of them as possible. We're calling this grief to growth. Grief is a very big word. And associated with that, we're also using the word called as loss. And when you kind of put these two words together, loss also appears to be very big. Okay. And I really want to bring a perspective to this word called loss. Children, and all of us go through different kinds of losses. Now, if you were to look at the context of children, they go through loss in terms of loss of a toy. They go through a perceived sense of loss when another sibling arrives in the family. They go through loss definitely, when they might fail, so-called failure in some milestone exams, or some opportunities they were really looking forward to participate in their schools. And of course, there's also a loss when where some very dear near ones, maybe their parents or siblings, pass away. The reason I'm talking about the various shades of loss is because many of us try to bucket this into small and big losses. And I want to narrate something that happened very recently, to us as a family in the month of April with the second wave of COVID. We went through, COVID in our family. My husband was hospitalized. He was there for 13 days. Very traumatic for us. First few days, we didn't know which way it was going. Doctors also had very clearly told me, don't ask us anything, we'll take each day as it comes. Of course, things went well, God's blessings. We came out, we recovered, and we kind of back to some normalcy. But after that, I have not been, keeping too great health. So I've been checking myself, my sugars and other tests, and finally realized that my BP has been a little high. So I've been talking to a cardiologist, and I asked him, because in the past things were very fine. My BP used to be normal. Is this a trigger after that, whatever happened at home, right, with the hospital and that situation? And he said, no, I don't think so, because your husband was in the hospital, yes, but he didn't go into an ICU, right? So I don't think that was such a big stress. So I did realize that doctors, see patients of, different kinds, and hence they might be bucketing, the stress that somebody endures into small and big. And similarly, we also bucket losses that children face into big and small. But for today's conversation and after today, I think all of us need to realize that a loss is a loss. And let's not bucket it into small and big. And from whatever we understand at this roundtable today, let's keep that in our mind in terms of tackling and dealing with loss and grief when it comes to children. So let me start with the first question to all the panelists. Each of them, as already we've been introduced, had years of experience working with children of different age groups. So I would like to really understand from them, what are the different kinds of loss that children have experienced? And maybe we'll start with Dr. Meghna. In so many years of your interaction, I'm sure you would have heard from the children or the parents or whoever kind of come to you with problems and solutions. And there would have been a pattern in terms of the loss and the grief that you would have seen. Has that changed ever since the pandemic hit us? And have you seen a different kind of a pattern in 2020 and 2021? Meghna? Meghna's video off, audio off. Maybe she's kind of looking at something else. Maybe while she comes back, we can have Jyoti take that question. You also have so many years of experience with school and children in school. You would have heard from children, parents, teachers, in terms of what they have been observing. What is it that you've seen in the past as a trend, loss in general, and then ever since the pandemic hit us?
So in my experience of having worked with children across age groups, in a school, definitely we encounter scenarios where there is, child has gone through a loss in terms of life. that is there. Lost a near or dear one, could be a parent, it could be a relative, could be anybody. That is something which we don't see very often, but it does happen. But besides that, we have also seen, how a loss of a relationship. Sometimes the child has been staying with grandparents, and some circumstance in life, those grandparents or somebody who was taking care of the child besides the parents have to shift out of that house. That's a big loss, and children do express grief on that. Not explicitly, sometimes it's so implicit that we have to kind of check as to what exactly would have happened. Loss of friendship, loss of companionship, all these have been part of the losses that I have seen in schools, and I'm sure all the teachers would have seen otherwise. But COVID times have brought in, it's very unprecedented, the kind of loss, the grief that we are seeing, loss of freedom. That is something which is so big, though I don't want to cast it to a bucket, but it is really big for the children, because they are not getting the life that they were used to, especially if we look at teenagers. They are not really very happy cooped up inside the house, because it is only healthy for them that they are with their friends, they are outside, they are meeting new people. So that loss is coming across very stark, and we are seeing it in different shades with different children. And even those that we consider are doing academically fine, if that is one of the criteria to well-being, not necessarily, but that is what society perceives it to be, and parents and otherwise people perceive it to be. Even those children are going through this, and it is immense stress. Another a very big one that we have seen as educators is loss of sense of safety, the assurance. No, otherwise, generally, there is this set pattern in life which children anticipate, parents anticipate, though we all know life is not certain. But still, there is this, okay, you finish this year, then you go to this college, then you'll do this, and you'll do this. And suddenly, life comes to a standstill completely, where they don't know what's next. They don't know whether they will be able to travel. They don't know what colleges are going to look like. When will they come back to school? So the loss of certainty, loss of safety is a big loss, and emotional security. These are some of the ones that I wanted to quote.
Thank you, Jyoti. Meghna, I think you probably were away. So the question that we asked everyone, and if you could, give us your perspective from your experiences, which is what are the different kinds of losses that children face in general, because you've had experience over the years, and has something changed? Has there been a different kind of a trend ever since the pandemic hit us?
Yeah, absolutely. So many kinds of losses I think that children face. It could be, as you mentioned, loss of a toy, which can be perceived by adults as small, loss of a parent, loss of friendship, loss of if their parent changes job, loss of a school, when they're moving homes, loss of that home that they've grown up in. Any kind of transition can be perceived by the child as a loss, right? As I think Jyoti ma'am mentioned, birth of a sibling represents a big loss. Any So now that we're living in a pandemic, right, I think the biggest loss that everybody is feeling, of children across all ages, is the loss of control. Again, as Jyoti ma'am mentioned, there's a loss of certainty, but I would add that element of loss of sense of control, because it is a very at fundamentally a very basic psychological need that all of us have, to be able to figure out, okay, I'm waking up, how my day looks like, what all I'm going to do. All of that is like turned over on its head, and that is a very big loss for all of us, even more so for children, because for a lot of them, they go about their days in a routine, and when that gets lost, that is a big blow to them. So loss of a sense of control is the biggest shift that I've seen since the pandemic, and it's really something that I think everybody is struggling with.
True. I remember, when we were newly into the pandemic, a friend of mine, she told me that her 5-year-old woke up one day and she looked at my friend, her mother, and she said, "Oh, is it you that I'm going to see again today? Let me go back to sleep." So there are those, we could kind of, take it as humor, but there is so much within that statement, right? In terms of what they are really missing out on. Dr. Nandini, I'm sure with all your experience with the Speak initiative and other things that you are involved in, I think Speak has been engaged a lot with schools and colleges with a variety of programs that you've been conducting in terms of building awareness towards suicide and mental health issues. Has anything changed with the pandemic in terms of the trend of the kind of losses that children are seeing, feeling? And are the statistics looking any different in the younger age group when it comes to mental health now?
I'd respond to your question, Nirja, in two parts. In the first, the losses among children, like those in adults, I think we could perhaps look at them as death-related losses and non-death related losses. However, as an adults, there is this tendency to trivialize, minimize, or deny losses children experience, except that those losses related to death are sort of seen as more grief-worthy than other losses. Maybe I will be coming to that in my other in one of my other in the other questions. But vis-a-vis the pandemic, what I've seen is among children, as with adults, there's this great sense of disruption, loss of rhythms and routines. I think there's been this huge transition which children have been forced to make from face-to-face classroom to virtual classrooms. And let's admit, when the pandemic started, at least in Madurai, where I live, I work with a group of teenagers. And I think most of us were just getting familiar with virtual classrooms. And I thought that was extremely disruptive in terms of a transition. So for me, the loss of rhythm and routine vis-a-vis the pandemic and the changes in I think a complete shift of education has sort of become a move to the virtual space. That for me was a huge loss, because I think education is not just, I hope, it's not just passing on information and accumulating information and knowledge. There is this whole other thing in terms of peer interactions, in terms of bonding, in terms of so much of give and take, which takes place in a learning space. And I think however much we might wish, a virtual space has its very, very real and significant limitations. So in a sense, I feel it's a loss of childhood. And I think that's a huge loss. It's a huge loss. And sadly, children, it's only when you realize it's a loss that you mourn. And you have certain rituals with which you engage and come to terms with the loss. So I feel here children are absent mourners.
True. A lot of this is not realized, because we kind of feel very proud of the fact that we've done very well despite the pandemic. We've moved everything online and we've adapted very well, because human beings are very good at adapting to things. But I don't know if we ever reflected on the impact of the losses that one has, had. And whether we have even been able to empathize, with the people who had to kind of move into these virtual mediums, especially the children. With this, I think, we also need to understand how do children really grieve differently from, others? What are some of the symptoms of children who are struggling with grief? And again, I would like to hear from all the panelists. Meghna, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. So the answer to that question is definitely, children definitely grieve differently than adults. In fact, I think that is part of the problem, that we don't realize that a child is grieving necessarily when, they do what they do. So, there's a saying that if you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve, right? So children of all ages grieve. Even infants have shown signs of grieving. So, but how you respond to that grief will differ according to different ages. But even in whether it's a young child or a teenager, How the child grieves depends on a lot of factors. So I don't think it's fair to sort of say, okay, these are the symptoms of what a grieving child or teen looks like. But it how they grieve depends upon their age, their developmental stage, their gender, their temperament, the ways they usually react to stress and emotion, their family circumstances, how others around them are grieving, their relationship with the person who has died, if they've had a previous experience with loss or death, how much people around them are supporting them. So it depends upon a whole lot of these factors. So it's not fair, I think, for me to sort of bucket it into a list of symptoms, which I know a lot of people do. So it's not fair, but I would just like to recount one particular kind of an unexpected reaction that even a young child can give in response to the news that their grandparent has died or something. And the mother is typically, or the father is typically, breaking the news to them, and the child looks up, and the child says, so the mother says, your grandma has died, your grandma died yesterday. And the child looks up and says, can I have a snack? And the parent is like, huh, did they even understand what I'm saying? Well, and that's what, in fact, this is what happened in one of the families. And the parents came to me for a consultation, and I was like, what makes you think the child did not understand what you're saying? They did. They were probably overwhelmed, and they could not express that overwhelm. They were not expressing that they could not understand. They were unable to express their overwhelm. So to that type of reaction, I would usually say, yes, Shwiri, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit. And I think what you're telling me is that you're thinking about what I'm saying, but right now you want to do something else, and that's okay. I'm right here whenever you do want to talk about it. And then and then to move on, and then the next day for the parent to come again to the child and say, Shwiri, I'm thinking about what we spoke about yesterday, you remember? If you have any big feelings, if you want to ask me anything, tell me anything, I'm right here. And maybe share your own big feelings with your child. I mean, it's perfectly acceptable to grieve in front of your child, to show your own responses. So it's very important to pause and actually use your child's response as a guide to what to do. But to say that this is a grief reaction versus this is not a grief reaction is actually quite fallacious, in my opinion.
That's true. That's true. And we usually think that grieving is about maybe crying or raving and ranting, or maybe going into a cocoon and sitting quietly. And that's kind of the accepted norm. But what I understand is there could be different kinds of responses and reactions, and all of that could be grief. Especially it's when it is children.
Asking a lot of questions is also, sorry to interrupt you, asking a lot of questions is also a form of grief. Like an older child might want to, or even a younger child for that matter, might want to ask a lot of questions because they really just want to understand what is going on. So that is also grief, right? So I think it's wrong for us to pigeonhole grief.
And what is that one aspect that they were looking forward to with that person whom they have lost, right? I this kind of makes me remember when I lost my father. My daughter was about 4 years old, I think. So of course, she was there when the entire ritual took place, of the cremation. And then the next day, I just kind of took her to a garden and I told her, do you understand that Tata is not there anymore? He will not come back. And then she cried and she said, oh, so who's going to take me out to the park from now onwards, right? So maybe it's just that they were, looking forward to, but that's also a loss. And that's the way they are.
And if I can just quickly respond to that kind of a situation, I would always tell the parent, when you are breaking the news and when you are helping your child process, the event, one of the things that helps them process the event is exactly this: telling the child if that person was involved in some part of the child's life or routine, you can inform the child, but what, from now on I will be picking you up from school, from now on papa will be playing with you, or from now on Masi will be coming and doing XYZ with you. So that also sort of helps, because there's this sense of, okay, now what, right? So that also helps. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Richa, can I come
Jyoti?
in?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so I just wanted to share what I have seen and experienced with children. The older children, there is this, there's a child who, of course, a child suddenly going quiet is something, okay, people say that, all right, maybe the child is grieving and fine. But I have seen children who suddenly become very chirpy. They want to talk and they want everything to be normal. They don't want the teachers to talk about, they don't want anyone to talk about the death that has happened or the loss that has happened. They just want, especially the older ones, they want everything to be normal. They don't want anyone to show extra sympathy or empathy. It's very clear, very, very clear. And the child goes, and it is so evident the child is trying to be cheerful. First day at school, wants to be cheerful, doesn't want anybody to talk about it. So that is something we need to be very, very considerate about, because it can get too pushy and it's very evident. And secondly, I have seen children, that is again, when they have experienced this loss, suddenly they want to be this brave person. They want to be this very serious, brave person who will take all responsibilities, no questions asked. I will do everything. Yeah? So that is also something I think we should watch out for and give them that space and slowly approach. And many a times it happens that we feel that over maybe a year or two in the school, what we're observing, okay, the child is coming back to his or her normal self. But then there are certain instances which are just a trigger. There could be some discussion, there could be some video which is played, and you can see the child slowly moving to the corner, just wanting to be left alone, doesn't want to participate. So that is so important for teachers to know. Just allow the child to be for some time and don't push, take my help, I will help you with this, I will help you with that. Just leave them alone, the older ones, and they will come back. They will come when they're comfortable, they will come when they need. That's something I wanted to share, because it's very evident, if a child is crying and is showing that he is not okay, it's easier. But this
Exactly.
is very different.
And I did see on the chat, Ina is saying that that's what her son is doing and it's worrying her and she doesn't know what to do. And we'll definitely, tackle that as a next question in terms of how do we make the children comfortable with expressing, what they are going through. So maybe Nandini, you can take both the questions and then we'll come to, the other panelists on the other question. So the question, Nandini, is how does a child grieve? I mean, what are the different ways? And we've kind of got some answers from Meghna and Jyoti. Is there something else that you have seen? And how do we make them comfortable in, expressing what they are going through?
For one, Neerja, I completely agree with Meghna's observations about not pigeonholing grieving responses in children. And I would say that's the same for adults, because I feel grief and grieving responses are as unique as fingerprints. And given that even in adults, we live in a very death denying, grief phobic, grief avoidant culture, I think we have our levels of grief literacy is abysmally low. And for me, that's very surprising. That's in fact very worrisome, considering that loss and grief are such universal experiences across lifespans. So that said, one of the things for me that is very striking is that the reason in a chat with Jacinta, I mean, a month back, I just felt children's grief is very disenfranchised. There are various forms of disenfranchised grief. When a grief is disenfranchised, it simply means that the person impacted by the grief has no right to grieve. It's just been taken away. Because it's not considered socially acceptable. There are certain forms of traumatic deaths which are stigmatized. For example, a death due to suicide loss, where the grief is very, very disenfranchised. I would say that most people impacted by suicide loss have this great need to invent socially acceptable modes of explanations about why it happened. I don't think you will find that in any other kind of death. So that said, How do children grieve? I think they, of course, grieve very differently from adults. And for me, I think two things about children's grief responses, for me, offer a lot of hope as to how even adults could process grief. One is that I think even among children, I think their responses vary depending on what age they are. Like toddlers grieve very differently. Infants obviously also do grieve, and slightly older children, teenagers, grieve very differently. And I think we could also make a distinction between death as a conceptual experience and death as as an experience. You know, death, experiencing death experientially, and death as a concept. I think the two are different but very closely related. And one of the things I found in children grieving is that there's this sense of magical thinking that the person who has died has just gone away somewhere and will return. I think most parents also tell them that they've gone away somewhere and will come back. For me, that sense of magical thinking is interesting because as adults, I think most of us who've been bereaved as adults, especially traumatic bereavement, also have this sense of magical thinking. You know, you just almost see the other person there. You feel that person is there, especially in the first year. And for me, that is a very important transition ritual. The other thing, how children grieve very differently, is that children have a natural ability to dose grief. You know, they could be seemingly normal within quotes. They might be playing, and then of course they might start missing, yearning, you know, looking for that person, especially if that has been a very significant other in their lives. So this sense of dosing, for me, it comes very naturally to children. And I think that for me is very interesting, because when even as adults, when we go through a bereavement, I think it's fallacious and overambitious to be able to deal with it all at once. We take one small step at a time, and I think children do it very naturally. And that's something which is very interesting and extremely adaptive. Yeah.
Thanks. So of course we speaking about death as one of the losses, but today we are also talking about any other form of loss, and we have to be kind of very cognizant of certain things that we are seeing in our children or not seeing in our children, and thinking, oh my God, is this normal? I just remembered, a couple of months back, just after this episode of COVID and all that we were back home. I was sitting down with my 19-year-old and asking her how her studies were going, right? All online, second semester of undergraduation. And she said, well, I've not understood a thing. Okay, very plainly, she said that. So 2 of her 3 subjects, core subjects, she said, I have no clue what has happened. This was April. I think exams were to start in May, maybe 2-3 weeks away. And so I said, so what? I mean, I didn't know how to process this. So she said, I tried my very best. And she's a bright kid, and she will try every possible, way to kind of, understand. So she'll be, hacking YouTube videos and this and that and Byju's and whatever else is available. And she'll try to get hold of people and learn. And she said, no, nothing happened. So I don't know anything. And I said, so let's do something. And I then quickly got a few tutors and, crash course, 2 weeks, she went, wrote the exam. And I kept thinking to myself, why is it? Because this has been a girl who's always been very open with me. Okay. And why is it that she did not tell me till the very last minute that this has been her struggle? And if I had not asked that question, maybe I would have just assumed, oh, all is fine. And then, you would have seen how the exams would have been. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, Neerja, it could be just this, that she is someone who's never had to ask for help till now. She's managed it herself. And probably for the first time in her life, she realized she's not been able to manage. And she didn't know how to kind of ask, express, or, respond or react. So that's why the next question becomes so important. We've already touched upon it, but I thought explicitly if I can hear from you in terms of how can we help children to, and make them comfortable to express themselves with reference to loss and grief. And I see a couple of questions on the chat also. So if we can take that, and maybe, in that context also answer this, where Vasanti is saying that kids are exactly doing this. They're playing normal, not wanting to show anything. And even Ina is saying that it's worrying her that the son is not really showing or doing anything, and she doesn't want to dig in, but she's wondering. So how can we make them, comfortable with expressing what they're going through? And Meghna, would you like to kind of take that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think that's a very good question. And the first thing that comes to my mind when you ask that question, Nija, is simply by expressing, I mean, it's not simple, but basically by expressing our own grief in front of our kids. And I think that is super important because children will often imitate the grieving behavior of their parents. And it's very important for parents to show their own emotions to their child, even if those are big feelings, difficult feelings, because it reassures children that feeling sad, that grieving, that feeling upset, or even angry is okay. Okay. A lot of parents I've spoken to feel scared bringing up the death of their loved one in front of their kids because they feel it'll stir things up. It'll get their kids to be upset. So they feel the lesser the said, the better, so as not to confuse the child or as not to sort of, they're doing okay, they're seeming happy, why should I sort of. But actually bringing up the loss and talking about it actually helps kids process the event. you know See, the one thing that we need to remember, like as a guideline almost, is that, and this is not just for loss and grief, this is literally across all domains, whenever we talk about child behavior, that information doesn't scare a child. Age appropriate information will never scare a child. If a child asks a question, that means she's ready for a developmentally appropriate response. What scares a child is actually wondering, being left alone, being left confused. All that terrifies a child. So, actually help talking about the loss, you know in the family, openly, one on one, as a family, all of that is important, right? And and of course, I mean, we've touched upon this, but accepting that there is no one right way to grieve, that kids will grieve in their own way, right? So with some kids who maybe not very good at putting their feelings in words, can other things help them? Can they maybe be helped to draw a picture? And that's what we do in play therapy and art therapy, in our clinics. Drawing pictures, building a scrapbook, looking at photo albums of the loved one, telling stories, reading books about death together can be a great way to start a conversation and bring up the loss. So the more you the more one runs away from this, the more we land ourselves in a problem, really. So yeah, expressing your own grief and talking about it, not worrying that it will upset my kids, because if you don't bring it up, that's more likely to upset your kid than anything else.
Jyoti, would you want to add something to this?
Yes, I would think that it is so important to get, if the child is going to school, it is so important to get the school in confidence. Because the child spends a major part in the school of the whole day. And it's so important that teachers know what's happening. And we are able to provide that kind of support as and when we see something needs to be done. Sometimes when I say something needs to be done is just be there. Just listen, because the child is not going to, many a time the child is not going to come and tell you I'm feeling sad, and may not. But just observing and being there, waiting for the child to come and open up. And sometimes we also do, we as a part of a practice at Samhita, we do have quality circle time where children sit together, we discuss topics, each one we give a STEM sentence and then they talk about it. So taking up feelings in these sessions is so important. Then the children see that, the other also feels so regarding a particular situation. It need not be personalized. It could be something impersonal. It could be a third case completely, may not be related to that child. So it is so important to talk about it. And I completely agree with Meghna that adults need to showcase how to grieve. There could be different ways, but if they see that the adult, everything is fine, the adult is putting up the show, with this whole wanting to be this brave person who can tackle anything in life, and that's what we adults generally do. Even teachers for that matter, I have experienced it myself, that the teachers who talk about their feelings, the teachers who showcase their vulnerabilities are the ones that the students feel most connected to.
True, very true, very true. Yeah. So it's so important for all of us, to realize that it's okay to showcase feelings and to talk about it. Doesn't matter what age it is. It could be child, it could be an elder, but it is important that we kind of express what we are going through. It allows the other person to, then be open to expressing what they are going through, and that way, together you could kind of, help the grieving process, and from there the journey to growth could start. Thank you. I know that there are some questions that are coming up. We'll definitely look at those. We will have Q&A time, but let's just move on, because there are a few questions that I definitely wanted this panel to address, and we will definitely look at those questions that are coming up in the chat box and in the Q&A. So let me come to a different point now, about schools and schools having gone virtual. And we have hope always, right, that it will come back into the physical space of the schools. So to start with, Jyoti, what is it that we can expect, and what is it that we must anticipate and prepare for when children now return back to school in the campus?
One thing for sure, I mean, it is going to vary from the age group to age group. If you look at the younger ones, we should anticipate separation anxiety big time, because they have been with the parents continuously. Look, kindergarten has not seen the world outside. They joined online school, they are online, they don't know what a school looks like, and there's so many people around and caretakers around. So that is something we really need to prepare for. It's like, we get a child into nursery for the first time. That's how it's going to be even for grade 1 next year.
Yeah.
Because the UKG guys have been nursery, very, very small part that they have spent at school. So that is one we need to prepare for. Secondly, we also need to prepare for these transition years. For example, grade from primary school to middle school. When they transition in the physical space, there is a way that we take them through this transition, considering the physiological changes, considering the academic volume is increasing. None of that has happened. Everything has gone online. So when they are coming, they are straight away getting into grade 7, grade 8, and they haven't had the time and these opportunities to transition. The peer group plays such an important role. The relationships with teachers change when they're in primary school versus when they're in middle school and senior school. So that is something that we really need to look at. And as far as the older children are concerned, they genuinely are not having many friends. We know what friendship in the virtual world looks like. It is so much on social media. And that's not what is when they are in the physical space. So we need to provide those opportunities for them to mingle at different levels and get that peer group for the ones, especially those who are very introvert by nature, who are shy, who don't want to talk. They are going to find it very difficult. So that's something as schools we need to be prepared for. And the oldest ones in the school, grade 12. Now grade 11, there are a lot of children who join the school new, because they're changing the school after 10th. And then they are at an age where they just don't feel comfortable just going, and like young kids, they'll go and talk to anybody. But older ones don't, and they have spent an entire year online. Now they're going to come back. We need to be conscious of that fact.
Thank you. Nandini, would you like to add anything to this, especially from a from home perspective? Is there something that we could do? Schools and colleges will take care of certain things, but is there something that we could also do to kind of facilitate this?
I agree with Jyoti about the importance of having transition rituals. And I think this is where I think parents, the home plays a huge role. I imagine it's not going to be back to business as usual in a jiffy, because there has been 1.5 years of a certain comfort of, being at home. And then suddenly transitioning to face-to-face classrooms, in as much as it's joyful and something to look forward to, I think it's almost like a relearning So I think parents have a huge responsibility in creating those very safe transition rituals. I imagine it would require a lot of hand holding. And so how do we do that? And that said, Nirja, for the earlier question, I just I wanted to say something I forgot. Let me see if I remember. I will come back.
Definitely. That
Yeah.
was around, how do we kind of allow them to express
Oh yeah.
themselves?
Yes. I think that grief is not one size fits all. And it's we need to have those candid conversations with children. I think we need to demonstrate resilient grieving. I don't see all that happening as much as is desirable. So even talking about death, it's almost such a taboo. If at all death is spoken about, it's like a footnote in the lifespan. So we need to have those very deep conversations about what is death, what is dying, and that it's an inevitable part of life and living. And in some cases, people just jump the queue. And I think it's important to tell kids that we're all in queue, but sometimes some of us jump the queue. And and how do you grieve resiliently? But considering so much of abysmal grief and loss literacy I see around, I think there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah.
Nirija, I wanted to
Okay.
add one more point
Please do,
here.
please.
This is, we need to also be very cognizant of this fact that children have seen a lot of life inside their homes. There are a lot of things which they never had access to, they did not know, they were not told, or they would just ignore. It never registered. But being at home 24 hours, now close to 1.5 years and probably another year, they are seeing a lot of reality of life which they were protected from earlier. So that is also something that we need to be very careful about as schools, I would think, as educators. Because parents, many times, they're not even aware what the child is seeing and absorbing. And sometimes it's huge for them.
True, that's true. Yeah.
I
In a way,
also
it
like
might be good. Yes, Nandini, please go ahead.
no, finish, sorry.
No, I was just saying, in a way, it might be good because if we had sheltered them from a lot of things, then it kind of just came out in the open. But yes, you're right. That might be, we could have been very insensitive and gone around, our lives in some ways. And the children have been watching us, and it could have really, got into them in a very different manner. So yeah, both ways. Nandini, yeah.
I think we need to do a lot of grief and loss myth busting, because these stereotypes, both benign and negative, they're so disempowering. And I think childhood is the best time to start with busting those myths. And I also think this whole notion of vulnerability, that vulnerability is something to be ashamed of. Vulnerability is to be hidden, it's to be camouflaged, versus vulnerability is strength. So how do you co-hold vulnerability? You can be vulnerable and strong at the same time. So how do we have those conversations? And I think I don't think this happens overnight, but I think schools also have a responsibility in creating those safe, supportive spaces where we can have these candid conversations and maybe express it creatively. For example, in a creative writing class, you could probably explore the themes of loss and grief. And I'm sure kids come up with very, very amazing ideas. And and talk around it, brainstorm, and then how do you maybe write a short story of someone, a child dealing with loss and grief, or a family dealing with loss and grief, or express it in theater, through painting, through poetry, whatever. I think creativity is a great way to metabolize and process feelings.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Meghna, anything you want to add to the question of what can we anticipate and prepare for children going back to school?
No, I will just want to. I was nodding vigorously at
Sure.
Nandini ma'am's response, because I'm a
Sure.
firm believer of how we should not shy away from these tough conversations, right? So she suggested a
Right.
very beautiful strategy, right? How schools can
Yeah.
utilize various creative ways of doing that. And I would just like to add, at home also you could do that. Parents also could do that. The only problem here is that we as parents, we always shy away from having tough conversations, or even if we do talk about something disturbing with our kids, something difficult, something big, something that we are struggling with, perhaps it's very tempting to end that conversation with, oh, but everything will be okay, you don't have to worry. And so we are ourselves in a rush to reassure, right? And what I would like to really assert right now and say it out loud, that tough conversations are not meant to be ended with a ribbon on top. It is very important, no matter which way you're having the tough conversation, whether through words or whether through creative means. It is very important for the processing of the event to happen, for the processing of whatever the loss or whatever it is to happen, for the child to be able to sit in with those difficult, with those big feelings, for the adult to be able to sit in with those feelings with the child. Otherwise, this whole endeavor, this whole whatever it is that we're doing is not really, it won't really yield what we're wanting it to yield. So it's pointless, right? So it's very important not to sort of, yes, we're embalming and we're soothing and all that, but this cannot be fixed with a band-aid, right? This cannot be fixed with a ribbon on top.
So it's also kind of, brings me to this point, which I have seen so much with my daughters, that it may not be grief, it might be any conversation, that we want to have with the child. Something that we've seen and we want to maybe give gyan, advice or whatever, but which we're trying to do it. We think we are the best, buddies. And so let's have a conversation. And many times I've seen Sneha, my daughter, say, okay, I know what you're getting at. I don't want to talk about it. Right. And I feel I want to talk about it. So I don't know what to do. Let us end it here. Or should I bring it out another day? Or should there be a different way to bring it out? What do you suggest?
So I would wonder if she doesn't want to talk about it because she thinks she'll receive a lecture about it, or she doesn't want to talk about it because it's going to be predictable. She's heard that a million times. You know what? I have experienced this, of course, firsthand, Nirja, but also it's a great strategy that I recommend to all parents. Whenever you want to talk to your kids about something, don't talk. Just ask questions. Just ask questions. Really, what do you think what do you think happened when this happened? What do you think this has happened to that person? Anything. Ask questions, right? In order to be a great listener, you have to be silent, right? You have to ask questions. And trust me, you will get to know much more about what they're thinking, feeling, if you just ask questions. The thing is, we are often not able to hold ourselves back, and we're like, blah, 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 I want to reassure you. I know so much about this. Oh God, if you just listen to me. Yes, but that usually, so ask questions. And beautiful strategy this is to really elicit everything that your child thinks, feels about that issue, that topic. And it's a beautiful icebreaker, because you're not saying, but you know what, I told you so. But you know what, you're not judging, you're not disapproving, you're not lecturing, you're not shaming, you're just displaying curiosity, you're just exploring.
May I just add one point here, in continuation to what Dr. Meghna is saying. If there is a possibility of the adult in this situation of detaching himself or herself from the emotion which is there in the talk. If I'm going to talk as a mother in that role, I might end up coming with my concerns invariably. So if I could detach myself from that scene, I'd say this to teachers also, I practice it myself, because as a teacher, I might be very emotionally attached to the child and I want everything for the best interest of the child. So unknowingly, I might go on that, that loop. Okay, so, I mean well for you, you should do this. I have done this in my life. This has worked for me. And then the child doesn't want to listen anymore.
Right.
So emotional detachment from that place might be helpful.
And that's why we always say, right? Oh, they'll never listen to the mother or the parent, but if somebody else does the same thing, yes. So yeah. Thank you for that input. And while we've spoken a lot about grief and loss and mechanisms in terms of helping children cope and express, anything specific when it happens to be the loss of their parent, maybe one parent or two parents, because with the second wave, we've seen a lot of that, right? In families where you had one or both the parents having been lost to COVID or anything else. Anything specific in terms of how can we as society, as teachers, as neighbors, as extended family, help the child? Anyone can go. Glad to hear from all of you. Nandini, would you like to take this first?
Yes, I would speak particularly with reference to disenfranchised grief. Like, for instance, if a child has lost a parent to suicide, I think the knee jerk is, and if the child is old enough, to be told in age appropriate way. What happened? It's invariably not told by the significant people in the family, thinking that again it's the stigma, the shame, the silence, and the secrecy. And the thinking seems to be, oh, they don't need to know. But my concern is children invariably get to know from other kids, because this is an open secret. So for me, I would rather that someone responsible in the family, who is very emotionally connected with the child, tells the child not the gory details, but that this so and so died of a suicide, and it's not the child's fault. Yeah, I think it's very, very important. Otherwise there's this misplaced, because people bereaved by suicide, whether it's children or adults, I think they have an exaggerated sense of responsibility, hyper responsibility, for having in some way been responsible for the death. So I think that would, and I think it's very, very important for the family to, have that, because otherwise the child hears it from XYZ and it's a huge letdown. Yeah. And I also think children are not, naive as we make them out to be. That I think that's a very benign stereotype, because kids can be cruel as well. I think all of us who have read William Golding's Lord of the Flies know, kids can be as cruel as adults, so that for me would be a very, and also if there's been a sudden death in the family, I think children need to be told and have those very candid conversations, maybe not all at the same time, but and I think there has to be a very significant adult in the child who will lead these conversations and be that go-to person for the child, instead of just being left to his or her own devices, which is, I think, more the norm than the exception.
Jyoti, anything you would like to add to that in terms of loss of a parent or both parents?
Yes, in terms of loss of a parent, things that we have done and we foresee we could continue doing and maybe improve on that as well. It's very important for the school to stay connected with the other parent, because the other parent not necessarily is able to handle his or her grief, plus trying to console the child. It's too much for that parent. And the school being there for that parent is a big relief from what I have seen. So that is one part of it. And the other part of it is to very carefully, consciously create an ecosystem for this child in the school. Like it's like a buffer, it's like a cushion for some time. But we have to be careful how we are presenting this cushion, because many children will outright reject it if we are going to just go and offer it that way. So sometimes, we speak to other children, how they can help, not necessarily bringing this child in here. And also bringing in that thing that, no, it's okay to get help. So many times I have seen that the other parent that doesn't want to take help. Like, I will handle. But my urge, my request is, allow us to help you. And again, each family, it is being dealt with differently. So it's important for the school to be sensitive on that as well. And have one person or one teacher be in touch with this parent. Help the parent understand, help us to understand what's happening at home. How is the child responding at home? How is the child responding at school? And give it some time. It works.
Meghna, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I guess in addition to what both the other panelists have said, I would just like to maybe add a don't there, because I've seen that happening a lot. That, we tend to, because it's a child, we tend to talk in euphemisms. Especially when it concerns death, we love euphemisms. We say things like passed away and went to sleep, and I don't think that's a good idea at all. Hearing that your parent has gone to sleep, or has passed away. Firstly, passed away where? It's very confusing, it's very vague. Gone to sleep can be scary. I know a case of a child that was brought to me who actually started becoming afraid of bedtime, right? Because he was repeatedly told that, your father has gone to sleep. So don't use euphemisms when discussing death of a loved one, death of a parent. And I can't emphasize this enough. Allow the children to grieve in whichever way they want, and encourage them to express their feelings and their thoughts in whichever way they want. Talk about your own feelings. It's absolutely okay to say that I am feeling this, and I understand that you might be feeling this, or how are you feeling? Reassuring them that grieving is completely okay, and that, with time, the sadness and the feelings of grief will lessen, and I am here for you. All of these things uh, are sound very simple, but from whatever I have seen in families, whether it's a death of a loved one or a parent, it doesn't happen. I don't know why parents, and I think all of us are to be blamed, we shy away from giving, we talking directly about death. We shy away from giving age appropriate information to kids. We shy away from allowing the feelings of our child, because it's almost like it's too painful for us to first process the event and then process that our child can also have big feelings about this. And also, again, in these conversations, this is not a one time conversation with your child, right? Or a child, right? These are like a series of ongoing conversations. And it's very important to routinely in these conversations pause and watch the child's reaction and be guided by that reaction. So we are not leading, we are leading the conversation only in terms of bringing up the trauma, the loss, or whatever it is. But we should not assume things about the child, and it's always a good idea to be guided by what the child is feeling, saying, not saying. Even when the child says, I don't want you to cry, that is also a feeling, because the child is probably uncomfortable with the adult expressing emotion. That is also a feeling, right? So yeah, I mean, I would just say that keep it real, keep it honest, keep it age appropriate, don't use euphemisms, and allow for expression of emotion whichever way it is.
I would
So I
want
think
to add a
that
word respect.
yes.
I just want to
Sorry.
add a word. I just wanted to add a word respect the child's feelings and emotions and state of being, grieving, whichever way it is.
We kind of assume that it being a child of whatever age, and while I may say 19, my daughter, but I will still think of her as a child for, my lifetime, I think. And I think, oh, she's not yet ready for that. Or these are not conversations, that we can have. I remember many years ago when I was at work, I was very unhappy with, a role change that, had happened. I was almost wanting to quit the company, and I was talking to the managing director saying that I'm very unhappy and I want to leave. And so he said, okay, but take your time, think about it. I mean, it cannot be a reaction like that, and speak at home. Like, you can speak about it with your husband or whoever else is there. And I said, yeah, but I don't think I can speak about it with my child. She was probably 10 then, because she won't understand. He said, what makes you think that she won't understand? Just ask those questions, your mother, now that you're in this company, what is it that giving to her in terms of your time? You're available to your child in the evenings, or if you were to take on another job, maybe it will be much high pressure and she won't see you in the evenings. Tell her those things. She will understand, and she will also, contribute to that discussion in terms of, inputs, which will help you take decisions. So yeah, we always think they're not yet ready, but I think they're more ready than any of us, is what I understand. With this, I have one last question, and then we'll go on to take the audience questions. We've so far talked about things which have happened, and hence how to deal with it. And I now want to ask how do we prepare our children for, situations like this? We always say we need to be prepared, we need to be proactive. Of course, COVID has taught us, that things unimagined, can happen. We don't know what else could happen, but there is always this need and importance to make children be prepared for whatever the worst could be. And how can we do that? Meghna, I would want your views on this.
Thanks for asking me that question. As I was telling you yesterday, this is something that I've like devoted my life to. And if I were to put it in one sentence, the answer to this very, very complex question, it would be just by letting your child express their feelings and by talking about your own feelings. It is really just that, because this is how we lay the foundation for emotional intelligence. This is how we lay the foundation for resilience. The foundation for resilience, for being prepared for the worst that life can ever throw at you, is not laid by buffering and cushioning. It's actually laid by having these honest conversations. It's actually what we're when what we're most scared of for our kids, or something we do or something happens, they'll be adversely impacted, they'll be traumatized. But trauma is never an event. It is not loss or the death of someone in your family. Trauma is about how you process that, how you sit with your child and talk about it. And if the child is alone with those feelings, with those overwhelmingly big feelings, if those feelings are ignored or shamed or pushed away in your family, that becomes traumatic. So how do you prepare your kids for anything is by telling them, what, let's be honest, and what, you can come to me and talk to me about anything under the sun. And that is what your child knows, that what, I can deal with anything, right? I can come to my parent for anything. And this is the source of my child's coping. This can become the source of my child's resilience, that that feeling of that very difficult, that very painful feeling is surrounded by my parents' love and warmth and availability, and that and openness, that I can be understood, that I will they will sit with my most painful, my biggest feelings. They will sit in those feelings with me and talk to me about it. This is the source of resilience, and this is how we prepare
So
our
much.
kids.
Thank you. And hence we need to start it today, this very moment, if you've not already, been doing it. Thank you so much. Let me look at the questions that we have got. Right, it's probably in the chat box. Let me quickly take a look at it. So referring to kids showing indifference or focusing on lighter items, that's what my son is doing. It worries me, but I don't want to dig in. So that's something that we did speak about. Maybe if there is additional points to that, we can add. Then the follow-up from Ina, who asked that question, he shared with the school counselor that he doesn't want to talk about, the whatever the incident was. He doesn't like to see people cry. He said, I don't like people coming and just being silent or talking about dad. He will be 13 in September. How can I grieve or talk about big feelings? He gets disturbed.
Well, I've sort of answered this already, but I'll
Right.
say that again. That I think there is something in the family, I'm assuming, that makes him uncomfortable with talking about big feelings. There's something in the way that he's been conditioned. Either societally, I think men and boys also have a lot of pressure not to sort of cry,
Right.
not to express big feelings, and I don't know how has his pattern of coping been before this. Has he been open to crying? Has he been told explicitly that it's okay to cry? I mean, you're a boy, you're a teen boy, it's okay to cry. But as I was saying before, I don't like crying. I don't like other people crying. I don't like, that is also a feeling, right? I would probably start from there. I would probably start from, okay, yes, I so let's not, in trying to make him get talk about feelings, let's not invalidate his own feeling. Okay, let's start with the validation of the feeling that he's expressing.
Okay.
Maybe he's not even
Alright.
aware that he's expressing a feeling. And I would start by exploring that first.
Okay, that's great. There's a question from Vasanti. One kid has asked me clearly that he doesn't want to see me crying or I don't know, crying. Another time when I softly asked both the kids about their feelings, one is angry, sad, and one stoic. I'm coping with all that you are telling as tools, but not them. Vasanti, I mean, if you want to kind of unmute yourselves and ask this question, because I'm not getting it. There's a add on to that. Great inputs, ideas that I completely agree with you on vulnerability and learning through creative work. I just wish I can step out of my own victimized place and just do right thinking and actions. Vasanti, is there something that you would like to add here or tell us so that we can kind of get the context? You could unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Neeraja. I've got some of the answers from the panelists. Thank you. So I just want to say, I wanted to ask about them not crying, not expressing at all. We as adults, we have found some ways to cope up, express our grief, but like we have discussed before, it's very difficult to understand how kids are expressing, coping with it. So
what I get from the discussion is that anything that they're doing is probably their mechanism of expressing it. And we are thinking that this is the right way. And if they don't do that, then maybe they're going into a shell, or maybe they are being, they don't have feelings or whatever else. But whatever they are doing, like Meghna said, if the boy is saying that I don't want to see anyone cry, even that is a feeling, and that's probably the way he wants to express his feeling, and give him credence for that. Anyone who wants to?
Yeah, I would just like to add one more point to that, Vasanti. I think it's a good idea to not pathologize what your kids are doing, right? And to sort of how would you sort of know that, oh, something is not really going wrong with them, or they're on the right track, they're coping and grieving in their own way. What I would do as a parent is I would continue to remain connected with them, right? I would continue to check in with them. I would continue to remain cued in with them. Okay. And when you remain cued in with your kids, whether they are stoic or whether they are, expressing, their experiences, their feelings in whichever way, I would probably start from there. A lot of times we are thinking about things in a certain way and we are expecting our kids to probably understand that. But I would probably do the opposite in this case. I would probably start from where my kids are at. So if my kid is playing a game, I would probably, in order to understand what is really going on with him, I would play that game with him and see what happens. Most of the times, especially with, preteens and teens, what happens is uh, they're not really comfortable with those intense conversations, eye to eye contact, let's talk about this. Some of the most deep conversations with kids that age happen when you're both focusing on something else, like when you're both playing a game, or you're both maybe involved in a chore, maybe cooking together or driving someplace. When that your teen's eyes are your teen knows that your eyes are not on him or her or whatever. A lot of seasoned parents know that some of the best conversations can be had when your attention is jointly focused on something else. Okay, so I would use those avenues to connect with my kids and to remain connected with my kids. And that is one way I can be sure that yes, they are processing things in their own way, and if they want to let me in, they will let me in their own timeline.
Cynthia, I hope that also
Dr.
answered
Meghna.
your question on how do I as a parent step out of my own grief so that I can help my child. I hope that was also answered. I'm just looking at, okay, maybe this is the last question. So I don't know if Ina is still there because she said she had to step out, but someone asked my son, where is your dad? He went blank and was so, zoned out. How do you teach children to deal with this when you are not around? Which is true. I mean, you're not always going to be around, and, there would be people who will ask questions. So again, it comes to how do you prepare your child? And maybe it's from what I'm learning from this conversation is that if you've had those conversations in terms of getting the child to express and grieve in whichever way the child thinks is right, maybe the child will be better prepared when you are not around. Anything that?
Yeah, sorry, I think I'm talking too much, but I would just like to add something
No,
here.
please.
In addition to what you said, Nirja, I think, again, giving the children the space up in terms of how they want to express. If the child does not want to talk about it, to give him the space to say, you know what, to his friend or whoever is asking, that I don't want to talk about it. It's okay, I don't want to talk about it. Or to say, yeah, this is how this person died. This is what happened. I mean, again, let's not script this, right? Let's just sort of, the more important part is not what the child communicates to somebody else. The more important part is how we are talking to our kids. Okay, so, and then leave it to the kids to whichever way they want to express that to somebody else. I mean, I would not look at that as preparation. I would look at what I am doing with my child, and perhaps what school is doing with my child. That is the real preparation here.
I'd like to add to what Meghna says. Meghna has just said. I think it's very important to model honesty for children. That truth needs to be looked straight in the eye, and that I think it's important for them to know that they own their stories, that that it's they own their narrative, not just their stories. They own their power and they don't give it away. And I think it's so important to also model not stepping into victimization, because that really seems to be a default response. And also I think we need to also perhaps model for children the difference uh, between sharing and privacy. How much you tell, and there are certain things you may not want to share. If someone asks how your father died, and that's perfectly valid. It's not a tell all, because there might be certain things you might share with someone and certain things you may not. And also what Meghna talked about, resilience. I think resilience is such a core life skill, but unfortunately it's so glossed over. It's you're just supposed to pick it up as you go along. And I think a family is the place where resilience is actually, the foundation is laid. I grew up in a very resilient, enormously resilient family. In fact, I just heard the word resilience maybe just 10 years back, but I saw it modeled, acted. I saw how people were dealing with life's challenges. And I think resilience is caught, not as much caught as it is taught. So how do those skills, strategies, those cognitions, the feelings? It's such a, I think it's in childhood that the foundation is laid. And then once the building blocks are there, kids and later when they morph into adults, it just the edifice gets stronger, bigger, and that's how it goes.
There's one last question before we close for today from Vijay Lakshmi. So she says, we, which is my daughter and I, are away from family, grandparents and my sister in India, with whom my daughter spent quite a lot of her early childhood. We have not been able to fly and come over to meet them because of COVID. She's 6 and I feel she has her inner feelings of them not being around her, but doesn't really express. Will asking questions and talking to her about it not too often help bring her emotions out? Jyoti, would you want to say something to this?
It might be helpful to talk about it, but not necessarily with the intention of getting it out from the child, because the child might be processing it. Okay, if we get something, it's fine, but not necessarily with that intention is what I would recommend.
Yeah. It's as a general conversation, because otherwise, if you don't get what you were expecting to get, then you will think this is not going the right way.
Yes. So the intention need not be so strong to get it out.
Right.
It will come. We just need to give it some time.
Sure.
Just to add on to that, what I was saying previously, right? A lot of time we as parents have these conversations with agendas. This is my intention. I want to do this. So I think sometimes just letting that agenda a little backseat and sort of saying, I'll enter into a curious like a curiosity, exploratory mode. And let's see where we go. That sometimes is a little more helpful and a little less shocking for us parents, because it actually offers an opportunity to actually know more about our child, and yet, not meander the conversation in the path that we are intending it to, which our children always, always, always catch. So have agenda less conversations is what I would recommend.
Especially the older ones, even if we have the agenda in
Even
our
the younger
subconscious,
ones,
the older ones can, just, oh, you're going there, not again. So
even the younger ones. I have a 6.5-year-old. She, even with the 2 words I utter, she knows she's a mama, please. I'm like, I didn't even say anything.
So if it's happening with you, Meghna,
please, exactly.
then I can imagine.
So I have to remind myself, no agenda, Meghna, no agenda. Come on.
Thank you so much. Before I hand over to Akanshi, I just want to kind of, highlight on some of the points that I learned from today. The first being, loss, and loss has so many attributes for children today because of COVID. Loss of freedom, loss of certainty, loss of routine, and loss of control, which I would never have, thought about. And that's why again and again I impress upon people that please have an open mind to whatever the children are doing and saying and expressing. There might be, so many other connotations of that which we don't, kind of realize, and we want them to be in a particular manner. Loss of childhood for so many of them, right? Because those early years, and it could have impacted them so very seriously. For them to kind of get over that loss of childhood of the last 1.5 years or 2 years, and then get back to the so-called normal or the new normal, I don't know what that's going to be, is going to, take time. And expression of grief, I think it's important that we have open conversations, we are honest. We should express our grief and our emotions and feelings in front of our children so that they know that it is okay, and they can also kind of, openly express. But any form of expression from them is okay. Let's not, assume and, want them to express it in a particular manner. So being quiet, not wanting to talk about it, or playing, and not, mourning is also okay. There is some amount of feeling and emotion, and that's their way of expression and, coping with that grief. I was so very, thrilled with this point where you said age-appropriate information should always be given. There's no need to kind of hide, and there's no need to think that, maybe this is going to overwhelm them or it's not the right time. Do give them the information because they know how to process it, and they will hence, kind of deal with situations in a better way. And finally, I think building resilience is the most important. And resilience, I don't think can be taught. It can probably be observed and, learned. So I guess they need to kind of see all of us as resilient beings. And that's one way of preparing them for whatever life has to offer in the coming days for them. Thank you so much, panelists. I know Akanshi will do the thank yous, but I had to also do my thank yous because it was a wonderful conversation. Akanshi, over to you.
Thank you, Neerja, for putting it all in a nutshell. And to be honest, what I really learned, I learned many life skills today. Something subconsciously absorbed from people, and something I've learned after learning all the observations today. Something also very important that I think Nandini ma'am mentioned that grief is as unique as fingerprints to each one of us. So this session is also giving each one of us unique lessons with respect to our own personal lives. And that is the whole idea of having such candid conversations on this Grief to Growth sessions, that we speak, we learn from each other, we get inspired, and we have this hope that, I can learn from so-and-so and I can do this. So thank you so much, each one of you,